Welcome to this week's episode of Ships, Sea and the Stars from Royal Museums Greenwich. Every week we're bringing you amazing stories of history and culture, creativity, space, sea and the stars, everything that Royal Museums Greenwich has to offer. If there's a question that you'd like answered on the subjects we're talking about or a topic that you'd like us to address in the future, do please get in contact. If you look for Royal Museums Greenwich on Facebook, Twitter or Instagram, you will find us and we would love to hear from you. This week's episode is all about togetherness, and it's also Museum Week, which is an event that runs from the 11th to the 17th of May this year. And Museums Week is all about a celebration of museums bringing people together, and the party is in full swing this year, even though it's online. So this week we'll be sharing some of the ways that Royal Museums Greenwich brings people together, and there are so many stories here. It's more than you might expect, and I love this topic because it really gets to the heart of what a museum is for. And this week, very excitingly, we actually have someone who is not sitting behind their desk at home, but is out and about in the museum, because even though the museum is closed, some things in it still need checking on. So we have a slightly different format this week. We've only got two guests, but they have lots and lots to say. We're going on a fabulous adventure together in the next 45 minutes. So let me introduce you to those two guests. And first of all, we have Imad Ahmed, who is the founder of the new Crescent Society. And we also have Karen Jensen, who's the Object Conservation Manager at Royal Museums Greenwich, and she is the one on the ground. Perhaps, Imad, tell us a little bit about your connection to this topic.
Well, the New Crescent Society is an organisation. We're a kind of loose, we're like an amateur astronomy organisation, and we're really interested in the relationship between astronomy, faith, and Islam. And one of the big things that we're looking at is the lunar calendar, because the Islamic calendar is one that's based on lunar observations. So month to month, we go out to sight the moon, and when we see the moon, it means the new month has begun. And we've collaborated really well over the last couple of years with the Royal Observatory in Greenwich. And we've had a program, actually, a planetarium show. I have to say it's one of the best-selling planetarium shows. So if you haven't been, once the observatory is open, you have to come, which has been running just for about 2 years, looking at the relationship between astronomy and Islam. So that's kind of the work that we're doing in New Crescent Society.
Fabulous, thank you. And Karen, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hey, so as you said, I'm Object Conservation Manager, so I look after a team that take care of the objects that we have in our collection. I'm part of the conservation team. We've got quite a few different specialisms within the conservation team, the objects as such, so anything that doesn't fall into a textile or a piece of paper or a frame or a painting, we kind of deal with those objects. So that can range from anything from the taxidermy collection to our horology collection, our working objects, telescopes, anything like that kind of falls under us. At the moment, I'm in the Polar Worlds Gallery, not my living room, because I'm kind of doing a bit of a routine check today to make sure that the objects are safe.
Fabulous, and we'll be coming on a little tour with you later on. But to get us started on our exploration of togetherness, we're going to start with an extract from, and it's about a reunion. And it's one of the most dramatic moments in polar history. It's an excerpt from the Ernest Shackleton's account of his 1914 expedition to the Antarctic. And if you don't know the story, the very brief version is they went to Antarctica, their wooden ship was crushed in the ice. The group of men who were on the ship had to get off the ship. Shackleton led them to a safe place, but then they were stuck in Antarctica with no radio, no contact. And so Shackleton and 5 other men left on a small lifeboat to go to South Georgia to get help. And the rest of the crew stayed stuck on the sea ice in Antarctica and waited. And this extract, this extract is the moment that they saw the ship again, that they knew they weren't just going to die in Antarctica stranded. And one thing that is useful to know here is that Ernest Shackleton was nicknamed the Boss. So after 4 months of waiting, this is what happened, and the passage is read by Simon Kane.
Lunch was being served by Wilde, Hurley and Marston, waiting outside to take a last long look at the direction from which they expected the ship to arrive. From a fortnight after I had left, Wilde would roll up his sleeping bag each day with the remark, "Get your things ready, boys. The boss may come today." And sure enough, one day, the mist opened and revealed the ship for which they had been waiting and longing and happening for over 4 months. Marston was the first to notice it and immediately yelled out, "Ship-o!" The inmates of the hut mistook it for a call of "lunch-o," so took no notice at first. Soon, however, we heard him pattering along the snow as fast as he could run, and in a gasping, anxious voice, hoarse with excitement, he shouted, "Wilde, there's a ship! Hadn't we better light a flare?" Narrow door. Those who could not get through tore down the canvas walls in their hurry and excitement. The hoosh pot with our precious limpets and seaweed was kicked over in the rush. There, just rounding the island which had previously hidden her from our sight, we saw a little ship flying the Chilean flag. Most of us had gathered on the foreshore, watching with anxious eyes for any signs that the ship had seen us or for any answering signals. As we stood and gazed, she seemed to turn away as if she had not seen us. Again and again we cheered, though our feeble cries could certainly not have carried so far. Suddenly, she stopped. A boat was lowered, and we could recognise Sir Ernest's figure as he climbed down the ladder. Simultaneously, we burst into a cheer, and then one said to the other, "Thank God the boss is safe, for I think that his safety was of more concern to us than was our own." Soon the boat approached near enough for the boss to shout to Wilde, "Are you all well?" To which we replied, "All safe, all well." And we could see a smile light up the boss's face as he said, "Thank God."
It's such a dramatic passage. And the thing that really strikes me about it is the contrast between the 4 months where basically very little happened, of waiting and waiting and waiting, and it's a slow routine and rhythm, and suddenly there's action and this desperation of this moment. What struck you about it, Imad? Perhaps you can go first.
Oh, it was amazing listening to it. It's what struck me was that human spirit of hope that remained with them. They're on a. I'm just thinking about them freezing, and every day they wake up thinking maybe the ship is going to come today, and just waiting and just not losing hope. It just really struck me. I guess especially now in this period of the coronavirus pandemic, in a way. I mean, they didn't have Wi-Fi like we have Wi-Fi, and we're connecting with one another. They just had one another and just hope with no connection to the outside. It's astonishing.
Karen, how about you?
So I think maybe it's because of where I am in the polar galleries, but the first thing that it kind of reminds me of is a lot of the objects that we have here, mainly because it does not seem like a very comfortable environment to be in. I mean, we've got a sleeping bag that's on display here, which does not look very comfy, and it's also not kind of to the standard of what we would think that we would be using if we were going out into the Arctic or Antarctic now. And also quite a lot of the food that I can see from here does not look very appetizing. So actually waiting 4 months seems excruciating. Whereas, you know, now we would have a lot more facilities, we would have better rations and things like that, and better equipment. So we kind of deal with it in a slightly better way. So actually looking around, it's quite sad listening to that and kind of thinking about what they would have gone through.
Well, I guess that's the moment when they finally don't have to put up with that anymore. Their sodden sleeping bags suddenly become a thing of the past. We're going to come back to polar adventures, but I want to start first of all with something that really goes to what the heart of museums can do. Obviously, the heart of a museum is its collections, but the collections, the objects in the museum, they matter because of what they mean to people. And the lovely thing about museums is not just that they're repositories of knowledge and culture and history. You know, they're not just the store cupboard, they have all these other things associated with them, and they don't just store the stories and memories of the past, but they're involved in creating new stories. It's an active process. And so we're going to start with Imad's story and how he came to work with the Royal Observatory. Imad, tell us briefly, just to get started, a little bit about how the lunar calendar works in Islam and why it's so important.
Well, the way that it works, maybe if I start there, is, of course, it takes 29 and a half days for the moon to go through all of its phases. And the month in Islam, or in the Islamic calendar, therefore can have 29 days or 30 days. You can't have 29 and a half days in a month. So what Muslims have to do is to determine whether each month they determine whether that month has 29 days or 30 days. And they do that at the end of the month. They go out to see a new crescent. It means that month had 29 days. And if they can't, it just means they have to wait an additional day. for it to complete 30 days. Now, it's really important for Muslims because one of the kind of, for me, really inspiring things about the Islamic calendar is that this has been a unceasing tradition of Muslims right back and documented to the time of the Prophet Muhammad, who is actually the founder of the calendar. There was a calendar in place in the Arabian Peninsula. He made some additions to it, he changed it a bit, and then he fixed it, and then he explained this is the calendar from here on in. So just to connect to the moon, just like museums, is to connect to history, but it's about forging our future time as well.
So let's have a look at the exhibit that you've brought to speak to this. And this is a video talking about moon sighting and how you can do it in the UK. Let's have a look.
Assalamu alaikum. I'm here at the top of the hill in Greenwich. I've got a brilliant clear view of the western horizon. And this is where I'm going to be doing the moon sighting for Eid on Tuesday the 4th of June after Maghrib, with the help of the Royal Observatory. But you don't have to be in Greenwich to sight the moon. In fact, this park is going to be closed. You can sight the moon on the top of any hill as long as it's got a clear view of the western horizon. Or you could sight it from the top of a mosque roof or up the minaret if the mosque lets you. Or you could sight it from the top of a tower block. I'm here at the top of the tower block, and as long as you can see the sunset clearly, it's a great place to sight the new crescent. Or you can even sight it from your own home if you've got a balcony or a window that overlooks the western horizon. But my favourite type of place to do it is a park. That's because you could bring a good group of people together. It doesn't have to be a high location. As long as you can see the western horizon and the sunset, it's a totally fine location.
So it's clearly lots of places to see the moon there from.
Yeah.
Now, tell me a little bit about how individuals do this. And you told me, specifically, you told me that when many Muslims came to Britain, you know, perhaps in the 50s and 60s, they had a problem with moon sighting. Tell me a little bit about that.
That's right. So, of course, many Muslims who are in the UK are, like myself, children of migrants or migrants themselves, often coming from quite warm countries, you know, like Asia, Africa, the Middle East, Caribbean. So when they came to the UK, they faced a uniquely British problem, which all British astronomers face, which is the weather. It's cloudy, like sometimes it feels like it's cloudy all year round. So when they would go out to look for the moon on the 29th of every month, you have to see cloud. I asked my father about it, and he swears that in the 50s and 60s, it was smoggier as well. And he said, we used to try and we just never saw the moon. So month on month, they couldn't see the moon. So they just couldn't commence an Islamic calendar in the UK. So they moved to a different solution, which was, well, we're going to have to outsource the moon sighting. So instead, they started phoning up or getting faxes from other countries, like my dad initially maybe from Bangladesh, but from Saudi Arabia, from Morocco, from South Africa. And so what we've had in the UK is actually a problem, because the moon, just because of its orbit, is not first visible on the whole Earth everywhere on the same day. So you might have the same road, and one mosque has outsourced its moon sighting to somewhere in Africa. One mosque has outsourced it to somewhere in the Middle East, and both countries see the moon on different days. And suddenly in the UK, there's no consensus. It's like, imagine doing Christmas. One person does Christmas on Saturday, one person does Christmas on Sunday. So we've never had that consensus around the calendar. And what we've tried to do with New Crescent Society is actually to break this myth and say, no, actually, we can see the moon. We just have to try from different locations and to have a go.
And tell us about how the observatory came into this story, because, I mean, the Royal Observatory does have, as you pointed out, it's on a very nice hill. But how did the observatory come into this story?
With New Crescent Society, we've been interested in Muslims and astronomy in general. So not just the moon, but also the sun, because the Islamic prayer times, I don't know if you can hear, but right now there's a call to prayer in Bangladesh. It's just maybe faint in the background. But the prayer times are determined by the sun. And in the past, people would have used the stars to find the direction of Qibla, which is, you know, maybe we use our phones now or compass or GPS. And so our organization, New Crescent Society, we made a kind of approach to the observatory. We said, these are the kinds of things that we're interested in. How could we collaborate? And the observatory were just like really open and welcoming. And actually, their view on it is the history of astronomy really owes a lot to Muslim astronomers of the past, So there was this great link there. So we worked together first to build this Astronomy and Islam program, which is a monthly presentation and planetarium show. But the observatory itself has helped us in kind of like providing a platform, training people on how to sight the moon. And I think we'll talk about it later, but helping us again to build a consensus around forming an Islamic calendar in the UK.
And this raises a question, and as you say, there's lots to get onto later, but what happens if, if you're somewhere that has a very good telescope, and that means you might be able to see the moon when somebody else can't see the moon? How is the community dealing with that problem? Is it a problem?
It's a problem, yeah. It's one of the most often asked questions, and it's a great question. And how I always respond is, what we're trying to do with this project of building a calendar and trying to sight the moon is to build a consensus, because a calendar by definition is an agreement. This year we've agreed that February's got 29 days, but next year we're going to agree it's got 28 days. So questions like this, like, should we use a telescope? Should we not use a telescope? Where should we take sightings from? Where shall we not take sightings from? It's a question of a community consensus. And where Greenwich has been so symbolically helpful and practically helpful is that Greenwich is, of course, a historic place where consensus around time and space has occurred with the Greenwich Meridian line for both time and, of course, the problem of longitude. Was it latitude?
Longitude. Yeah. So lovely, thank you. And obviously it really shows, it's one of the lovely things about Greenwich, I think, is that the history isn't just in the objects, it's in the buildings. Like, history was created there. It's not just a storehouse of it. And we're going to move on to look at some of the objects that are in those very historic buildings at Greenwich. And of course, any object that was in the museum, at some point it belonged to someone. It had a significance to an individual in its own time, not just to us now. And so the museum receives, collects objects, makes acquisitions, and then holds on to them in also, for everyone else, in a way, holding on to everyone's memories. But that brings with it, obviously, a big responsibility. And so, Karen, you're checking in on the Polar Worlds exhibition. First of all, just show us a little bit about where you are. Show us what's around you.
So at the moment, it's very dark, but I can just show you, this is the gallery and what it looks like when it's closed and no one's here.
I've never seen it
one
empty.
end of the gallery. So normally the lights would be off and there's a motion sensor. So they're on for the time being. But obviously normally we would have a lot more lights in here, or the showcases would have their lights on as well, kind of spotlights on the different objects and labels and things like that. So at the moment it's just the background lighting or emergency lighting that we have in the gallery spaces. Some of them are completely pitch black, which makes touring quite interesting. But it kind of depends on the galleries and proximity to windows. This is a windowless gallery, so it's only artificial lighting, whereas, things like Neptune Court, because we've got the glass roof, that obviously has quite a lot of light at the moment. So otherwise it's quite dark.
Obviously you're checking on things because you have to look after them. So let's talk a little bit about what happens when objects first come into the museum, because your role as a conservator, do you want to say a little bit about what your job actually is? Like, what sort of things do you actually have to do as a conservator? And then you can tell us about that thing with the sharp teeth behind you.
So our roles vary quite a lot between disciplines, but the main kind of purpose of our job is to look after the collection and to prepare the collection either for display or for storage if we want to. Oops, sorry. There it goes. Sorry.
Going for a bit of a walk.
There we go. So we basically make sure that the objects are either prepared for storage. So if something is what we call actively deteriorating when we get it, or has issues when it arrives, we prepare it for storage so that it can be preserved for future generations. Or we will then treat things to go on display depending on what the intended purpose is of the object. So our role varies quite a lot from day to day, which is great. We do a lot of different treatments, and most of the studios have very wide remits of objects as well. So it varies quite a lot what we do.
So tell it now, you've got a fox, an Arctic fox and an Arctic hare behind you. And obviously the thing about, I mean, many objects I'm sure are very complicated to preserve, but a stuffed animal sounds particularly difficult. What happened to these two when they came into the museum?
So these have been quite an ongoing process of care. Taxidermy is particularly high risk for things like insect attack. We've got certain insect species that kind of feed on textiles and taxidermy and skins and feathers and things like that. So we kind of have to keep very on top of the preservation of these objects to make sure that they're not being attacked by insects. So what happened to these while we were getting them ready for display, we noticed that they had not a very active infestation, but a couple of moths had kind of got into the fur and were having a nice time feeding on the fur. And this by itself isn't, a huge problem. We have treatments for them, but obviously moths lay eggs and then you get larvae and things like that. So it can very quickly escalate into a very big problem, especially for museum stores where we've got huge collections of textiles, things kind of all grouped together. So when we discovered that these had an infestation, we basically wrapped them up in a specific way and then put them in a freezer. So we've got a specific freezer, which is a -30 freezer, which is extremely cold. And what we do kind of like a low temperature treatment. So we put these objects into the freezer for a specific period of time, kind of wrapped securely to make sure that they don't get damaged through the process. And then what that does is it kills all of the adults, it kills all of the larvae, and then all of the eggs as well. So once we take it out the freezer and unwrap it, they're then safe to either be reunited with other objects on display or go back into the stores. But what was quite interesting with these and the textiles is that the moths like to kind of hide in the fur. So what I needed to do after these came out the freezer was basically comb through the matted fur to kind of look for all of these horrible insects that were hiding, and then take them out and make sure that they weren't there.
So if anyone has ever wondered what the conservators of the National Collection do to preserve things for posterity, it's basically being a nit nurse to an Arctic fox.
Yeah.
And how do you feel, because obviously do you feel the responsibility, especially, the stuffed fox perhaps not so much, but some of the objects that have come from specific communities, that meant a lot to that community. Are you sort of aware of that history when you're conserving them, or are you just really busy trying to stop them rotting?
A bit of both. I think we're very aware that certain objects have quite spiritual significance or cultural significance or religious significance, and they're quite important objects that we need to treat in a very kind of sympathetic way and respectful to those communities. So it's the kind of thing that when we're doing certain galleries, like the Pacific Gallery, for example, we had a lot of traditional cultural items that we then had to be very respectful to and treat in specific ways. And also when they were then installed, we had the communities come and kind of bless the objects and seal the cases with us to make sure that they were spiritually sound, which was very nice.
So it's a lovely comment. It's so much work, and I think one of the things I certainly didn't know till I got to know the museum better was how much time goes into conserving things for communities, so that people can continue to relate to them in the future. So we will switch topic again now, but just before that, I will remind our audience that this is Ship, Sea and the Stars, the weekly online broadcast from Royal Museums Greenwich, and we're talking this week about togetherness and the power of museums to bring people together, with special guests Karen Jensen and Imad Ahmed. Imad, let's come back to you, and let's talk a little bit about community. Now, show us the photos that you've got here.
Well, maybe whilst the photos come up, I'll just talk about, to help your viewers maybe understand some of the inspiration behind this. Maybe if I tell a bit of a personal story, is like growing up, I've never known what day Eid is. When I was a schoolboy, my teachers would ask me, and half the school would take one day off for Eid and the other half would take another day off for Eid. And then I became a school teacher, and then my head would ask, what day should we give the kids off? I say, I still don't know. So it's been like a genuine practical issue in our day-to-day lives that we've not had a community Eid. And as I've come into this project, I've heard from people who say things like, you know, I live in my house, I've got a next door neighbor, we're both Muslims. We follow one Eid and our next door neighbor follows another Eid. And it's really sad because, you know, our children are doing Eid on one day and their friends who live next door are doing Eid on another day. So not having that togetherness and that community and that consensus for Eid within the same locality, sometimes within the same road, it's felt, you know, really fractured, and it's not been a nice feeling growing up. So what happened to me is, I mean, I've been doing moon sighting for about a decade, but 4 or 5 years ago, I went on holidays to Cape Town, South Africa, and I saw how they do it. And what they did was, they go down to this designated beach every year for Ramadan and for Eid, and we're talking thousands, 4,000 to 5,000 people. They go together, they're having like barbecues, picnics, the kids were playing, they had this like bouncy castle. And then they collectively as a community looked at the moon together and they collectively decided, oh, it's Ramadan for us, so we're going to start fasting from tomorrow. And I just saw this and I was really inspired. I thought, wow, why can't we do this in the UK? And that began the journey of founding New Crescent Society, reaching out to the observatory and discussing how we might actually be able to observe an Islamic calendar in the UK. So when I guess first began, there was about 3 or 4 of us sighting the moon, like in the whole of the country. But just the numbers have grown so much because this is part of Muslims' history. So this picture is from a moon sighting location in West London, and I trained a group of mums and their kids. So they're there, and probably just like 2 families at the time. But this is just a demonstration that it's just grown and grown and grown. So here, the community of, it's in West London, they get together and they sight the moon together every single month. And I think what I love about this group is moon sighting is so easy. Until I learned, I didn't know how easy it was. And the children are some of the best sighters, I think, in the country. And we've had adults and imams come to this group, and the imams are there to teach everybody, but actually the imams, we've forgotten this practice in the UK, but the kids know it. So the kids and the mums were actually teaching the imams, this is how you do moon sighting, and this is how you start the month. So that was a really lovely experience for us.
So how does this, so the difference now then is that what you've created is a network. So one of the lovely things about it is that it deals with the problem of the weather. Tell me how you deal with the problem of the weather.
Now, the weather is the biggest problem. So I know it might feel like it's cloudy in the UK all year round, and we make jokes about the weather and the rain, but it's not cloudy everywhere all at the same time. And so what we worked out is actually, if we have a network of sighters up and down the country, month for month, we can see the moon, and we do see the moon. So, you know, people have contacted me from Scotland and Cornwall, and I've been to locations around the country, just training communities. This is how you sight the moon, and then we begin. And now what we found is, because monthly we are sighting the moon, we're able to theoretically have our own calendar. We don't need to outsource abroad again. So after about a year of doing this, we found over a period of 12 months, we saw the moon basically every month. There was 1 month we didn't see the moon, and it was cloudy in England, but it wasn't cloudy in Scotland. But we didn't have anybody in Scotland that month. But I'm convinced if there was somebody there, we would have seen the moon. So really how the observatory has, and the Greenwich Museums in general have really supported this movement is, so the picture you see here, we held a conference, and it was actually 12 months ago, or 13 months ago now. And we got together about just over 100 different mosques and community leaders and imams. So they're from around the country, and to have a discussion, can we come to a consensus about the calendar? Now we've got so many people, we've got the community sighting the moon. And it was just such an inspirational conference because there were imams there who are the very senior figures in their own communities. And they said, we didn't even know that you could see the moon in the UK. We were told that it's too cloudy. So the observatory has really helped kind of open the eyes of many of the Muslim community. But again, it's just that, to me, it felt historic. It's the symbolism that we're in Greenwich. This is where we measure the meridian from. It's where time is measured from in terms of our time zone. It's where, you know, UK's time starts. And we're here having the same kind of discussion. How can we collectively decide on our time. So it was, to be honest, quite moving for me and a lot of other people who were there.
And one of the lovely things I think about this is you've spoken to me before about the idea that everyone should be able to see the moon. Like however you decide, however your community decides, it shouldn't be something that needs special equipment. Even if you need the expertise of the astronomers to help you, actually really everyone should be able to join in. Of
course. So, I mean, I've been thinking a lot about this calendar and what a calendar is. And with the Islamic calendar, the fact is human beings go out and they interact with nature, a celestial body, most time in its origin, like years and months, even weeks, you know, they're named after celestial bodies. They have a connection to the skies, to the heavens. And so we go out, we sight the moon, and we as a community, having a subjective experience with the skies, collectively get to determine whether our month starts or not. So we are constructing time. And what I love about it is time isn't determined by a committee somewhere, you know, like a UN committee or a parliamentary committee who say this is how we're going to have time, or it's not even set by the Pope. Like, you know, Pope Gregory made major calendar reforms around the leap year that we use. It's month for month. As long as we all work together, we as a community will be determining time. And, you know, you asked a question before about the telescope and said, well, it depends what the consensus is. But I have an opinion, and my opinion is it shouldn't be with a telescope, because a telescope, again, moves that community experience of sighting the moon away from the hands of the community to the hands of a specialized group of people who know how to use a telescope. I'm not saying they shouldn't be involved or they shouldn't help or we shouldn't all work together, but if we keep it as easy and natural as possible, and that is the spirit of the calendar, to be easy and natural as possible, we can all participate in it. So the video that was there, it was to show that you can see the moon from wherever you are. You could see it from your own home. I made that video last year, and that video was called Bring the Moon Back Home. And, you know, I was kind of playing with this Brexit, like, Brexit, we have to do a moon Brexit. We take back control of the moon. It belongs to us. The moon is ours. It's no one. So that was the kind of thing I was playing with. But with the coronavirus, people actually were looking at the moon from their own homes. And, you know, maybe...
Yeah, tell me a little bit about Ramadan this year, because obviously the part of the point of Ramadan is to bring people together. And this year that wasn't possible, but technology has helped you in a different way there.
It's been unbelievable. So in the past, maybe we had 2 or 3 people who saw the moon. Last year, with the Royal Observatory Greenwich, we've done these live streams, which have had about 15,000 people view the moon for Ramadan last year. But that was from a single location from Greenwich, you know, streamed. This year, I didn't think anybody would be able to sight the moon. So we did make another video, and we said to people, you can have a go from your own home. But like, my gosh, like people saw the moon up and down the country in a way that I have never experienced before. So Cornwall, all across the south coast, the east of England, London, Midlands, Wales, Scotland, everywhere. And people were sending pictures and pictures and pictures. And it was because of WhatsApp. I mean, I don't want to like mention social media brand names, but because of all of the social media platforms that are available to people, because they can have a camera in their own hands, they can take a picture themselves, because they can learn how to sight the moon from the resources we've made and the observatory have made, that this year we've seen the most number of people go out to sight the moon for Ramadan to successfully see the moon. And if you see some of the comments on social media, people say things like, I'm crying. I've learned to see the moon, and it's the first time I've ever seen the moon. And I didn't need an expert to teach me. I just watched a YouTube video, and here you know, it's been a very emotional experience for people. So can I just say one thing, which is kind of linked to the emotion of seeing the moon? The Arabic word for crescent moon is hilal, H-I-L-A-L. And the Arabic Semitic root of it, it means to scream out for joy. And the Hebrew word, it's similar. And for example, the word hallelujah, it means to sing praise of Yahuwah, of God. So this idea that you go out, you see the moon, and you look at the moon, and you feel great. I promise you, if you see that new crescent moon, you'll feel amazing. So just for me, I just feel so privileged to work with the observatory and to bring that joyous experience to as many people as possible.
And I'm sure that the observatory, whatever faith or lack of faith people observe, that the idea that looking at the moon brings joy
absolutely
is a very powerful thing. So
and I think that's the metaphor of the moon, which is you don't have to be Muslim to enjoy the moon or Christian. The moon is for everyone. The wonders of the sun, the sky, it fills us, all of us, with that sense of awe. And it's one of the metaphors of this project that I love, which is it is for everybody.
Well, let's go back to the objects inside the museum that are for everyone in a different way. And let's talk a little bit about, Karen, what's the preservation long term? So something arrives in the museum, you look after it, you do your knit nurse job, and then the museum has to look after it so it can continue to be part of community memory for a long time to come. What sorts of things can happen to objects? Yeah, I think you've got a ship's biscuit. Should we have a look at the ship's biscuit?
Yeah, so this is an example of another insect which likes to attack collections. So it's a biscuit beetle that attacks ship's biscuits. It's quite common historically to have stories of sailors who used to eat these biscuits and have to kind of tap them on the table to get rid of all of the biscuit beetles and horrible things that came out of the ship's biscuits. But that kind of still happens today. So these insects kind of get in either to display cases or into our stores and then find these lovely things that they want to eat and then kind of attack them until there's nothing left. We've got quite a collection of ship's biscuits that either have got historical damage from biscuit beetles or ones that have kind of had problems since they've been with us. Insects tend to get in everywhere.
The pictures we can see of these biscuits, this is genuine writing on the biscuit.
Yeah.
But none of us
Yeah.
why.
Wow.
I don't know. We tend to get a lot of objects that have things written on them, either by people that have then given them to the museum or have had them in their own private collections as a kind of memory note or for whatever reason. And then when they then come to us, they obviously have these labels on them that we then try to preserve because they're now part of the history of the object. They're part of, the people that have had them before and how they took care of the objects. So we tend to leave labels like that on things.
What's brilliant about that
history.
So I think it was a few years ago, there was a debate about what counted as a cake and what counted as a biscuit from the point of view for tax purposes. And as far as I recall, the decision was that the thing that made a biscuit was that if you left it by itself for a long time, it went hard enough to write on, apparently.
Yeah.
So I assume there are very few cakes in the museum collection.
None that I know of. We've got a lot of chocolate.
Oh, really?
Yeah. I don't know, collecting like souvenirs, collected chocolate, more for the boxes.
Chocolate? As a conservator, what do you do with chocolate?
It's quite difficult because it's also the kind of thing that gets attacked by biscuit beetles. They love all the good stuff. So we have we have them in special boxes that don't, kind of prevent insects from getting in.
And what else, just in terms of, threats, should we say, to objects in the museum collection, what else can happen? What else are you looking, you're doing your tour of the museum, the gallery now to check potentially for problems. So what sort of problems do you need to keep checking for?
Most of the ones that we check for are things like leaks or, things that have fallen down or damaged. Normally when the museum is open, we have quite a big team of people that go around and obviously work on the objects, clean the objects, and then a lot of the front of house team as well inform us as soon as there's a problem with anything. But now that we're closed, we don't have that. So the point of us kind of walking around is to just make sure that the objects are okay and that they're stable. You do occasionally get things like flaking paint and things like that on objects. Luckily, we've not found any yet since we've been closed, but it's the kind of thing that happens to objects. Objects adapt to their environment. Most of them are hundreds of years old, if not thousands of years old. They adapt and change over time. The other thing that we're looking out for, particularly in the beginning when we closed, was the light conditions. So most objects deteriorate in the presence of light. So things like textiles obviously get very faded in the presence of light. Normally when the museum is open, light is very crucial to actually looking at objects. But while we're closed, we don't need the light. So we've been systematically going around and then working with estates to make sure all of the display cases are off as much as possible. We can kind of reduce the light levels because there's no point in them deteriorating when no one's looking at them.
And maybe that's a good time to bring it. So one of the things that I didn't know existed until I was more connected to the museum is it has a bit of a mouthful of a name, the Prince Philip Maritime Collection Centre. But this is a new building. But so tell us about what happens there and why it is, because this one is fabulous because you can actually go around and see stuff. So tell us a little bit about that.
So the Prince Philip Maritime Collection Centre houses most of our collection of objects and our textiles, paintings collection, and also has the conservation studios. It's great because it has a lot of research space and learning space. So we have school groups that come in and do specific projects based on the collection. And also we have weekly tours on Thursdays where visitors will come in and they'll come into the conservation studios and we'll kind of talk them through what we do and what we're working on. And it's a great opportunity for us also to connect with people. So quite often you'll have somebody who will come in and look at an object in a completely different way than we would, or they'll have a connection with the object. So in our studio, we have a lot of ship models, and it's very often that someone will come in and they'll say, oh, my uncle worked on that, or, you know, they sailed around on that, which is great because we kind of get a lot more of a personal connection with the objects from the stories that other people tell us. So
and
it's a great
behind the scenes. It's a great behind the scenes place, isn't it? Because it's not the museums itself. Museum galleries are fabulous, but they are sort of organised in a specific way. They're organised to tell a story. And what I love, apart from potentially the See Things gallery, but what I love about the Prince Philip Maritime Collection Centre is that there's just these drawers, and instead of being hidden away where you can't see them, you know, I've been there with conservators and they just pull open a drawer, and of course the things in the drawer are all the things that are the same size. They're not organized by historical age, they're just all the same size, and it is, and I've seen groups coming around and people respond so well to that, don't they?
Yeah, it's a real privilege for us to be able to work so closely with things and be able to open a cupboard and have a look at what's inside, and also to then show people and kind of see their reactions of how they look at things.
And what sort of thing? So do people tell you their own story? Have you ever had someone say, oh, I've got one of them at home?
Yeah, we do actually. Quite a few people come round. It kind of depends what's in the different studios and what's going on at the time, but we quite often have people come in and talk about things. In our studio, horology is very popular. People come in and have a look at our clocks and our horology conservator and what she's doing. And then they'll look at our ship models and they'll say, oh, well, I've got one of those. How would you do this? And how would you fix this? And kind of have a bit more of a discussion with them on how they would look after their own objects at home.
And it's great because it's open. I mean, I think this is really important. It's not hidden work. You're saying this is what we do, and we're looking after these things for you, and this is what we're doing. I just wanted to finish with, we're nearly out of time, but I just wanted to finish to get both of your perspectives on what museums are for, because, you know, we've seen the behind the scenes thing with Karen and all the work that goes on to preserve objects, and we've seen the living stories from Imad. And I just wondered, what are both your ideas on, you know, on what museums could be, or what's the difference between what people think a museum is and what a museum should be? Imad, have you got some things to say on that?
I think the way that the museums have currently engaged the Muslim community have transformed the way that I and many of the community perceive museums. I think maybe you know, like when I was a kid, used to go school trips in a museum, felt like I was being dragged around, looking at stale things, history, in a way that wasn't alive. But because the observatory is engaging with us in a way that is not just, it's about celebrating the past, but constructing a future together. And this place, Greenwich, is the place where that historic consensus around time is symbolically located. And then to open that out to the community, you know, it's been really exciting for us, and it feels like a place where we can make our own future and make our own history. So it's, you know, it's transformative, to be honest.
And Karen, what do you think about museums of the future? Because all the wonderful objects you're conserving will be there in the museums of the future. What do you think museums could be that they perhaps aren't now or aren't seen as?
I quite like the route that we're going down with being a lot more interactive. And as you mentioned, See Things is a perfect example of a lot of objects on display and on open display, out of cases, just, you know, people can have a look at them and get up close to them. And it's just quite a nice way for people to kind of interact a lot more with things and a lot less structured and just more informative. And it's got it's got iPads that you can have a look at details of the objects. It's still got that kind of history and background information that you want to give people if they're interested in that, but it's the kind of much more, you can do what you want in that space. Not what you want, but you can kind of take what you want from that space. You can either just look at the objects for what they are, or you can get the history, and it's a lot more versatile and kind of adaptable for different people.
It is. I think, I mean, there are many amazing galleries in the museum, but the See Things has something special about it, which makes it almost everyone's secret favorite, I think, because it feels so liberating. It's wonderful to be told stories, but it's also wonderful to make up your own, or to invent, to look at something and think of what the story might have been. Right, we are out of time. There's always so much to say. We've run out of time again. So we'll be back next week with more objects and more expertise on sea and space and history and creativity and all kinds of fun things. If there's a question that you want answered or a topic you'd like us to deal with, do please get in touch on social media. So look for Royal Museums Greenwich on Facebook, Instagram or Twitter. And while the museums are closed, they obviously are, a lot of the work is going on to conserve the objects and to take on some of the, the serious responsibilities of the museum do carry on. And ticket sales normally account for about 50% of the museum's income, and we obviously aren't getting those at the moment. So if you're up for supporting a museum, the museum would very much like your financial support at the moment, as well as your joining in with all of these episodes. And if you'd like to donate, there is a donation page at rmg.co.uk, so you can search for that. And there's lots more stuff online as well. There's lots of the collection. There are photographs of it online. There's art classes and craft activities, and this month particularly, astronomers are celebrating Astronomy. Someone is very proud of that pun. So every day in May there will be astronomy activities and videos and things to read. So go and look at rmg.co.uk/astronomy, and your spell check will hate it, but do it anyway. So next week we will be talking about keeping our shelves stocked. Throughout history, ships and various other forms of transport have brought food and supplies to the UK, and they still do today. So we're going to be talking about food supplies in history and in the present. So join us for that next week. And then all I have to do now is thank our fabulous contributors, Karen Jensen and Imad Ahmed. Thank you to Simon Kane for the reading, to Steve Thompson for our theme music. James Gill was the producer, and I'm Helen Chesky. I'll see you next week.